had a friend whose mom thought that I could give her HIV because I lived with my aunt, Violetta, who has HIV.
Michaela Espinosa was discriminated against because her aunt is living with HIV.
We are here always fighting for our lives, and telling people living with HIV that we can make it, we can go on.
Juan Carlos Capilder struggles to get medicines for his daughter since she was born with HIV.
10,580 cases were reported in Bolivia between 1984 and 2013. This is an epidemic concentrated among some high-risk groups, and in the most populated departments. Migration within the country or abroad in search of better work opportunities. Widespread tuberculosis and the stigma attached to HIV could all be hiding the real face of HIV in Bolivia. Living well with HIV, demanding our fair right. Stigma continues to grow among groups considered to be at high risk, such as gay men, sex workers and drugs users. This misinformation stops Bolivians understanding that they are just as vulnerable to HIV. We prefer to believe it could never happen to us.
This virus doesn't just goes after the so-called high-risk groups. Anyone who engages in risk behavior is in danger of getting the disease. Nowadays we see a lot of housewives who have HIV, and where did they get it? In their own beds.
In the first few years after HIV was detected here in Bolivia, many people died for lack of antiretroviral drugs, proper healthcare and the social stigma attached to the disease. In 2000, 15 leaders living with founded Red Bull. 2 years later, 52 people living with HIV took the Bolivian government to the Inter-American Commission Court on Human Rights. They demanded their medications as a prevention measure to avoid their deaths. Of the 52 people who signed the petition, only 8 are alive today.
We wrote Law 3729, which is the HIV law. This law talks specifically about comprehensive, multidisciplinary and free healthcare for all people living with HIV, and about access to medication for all people living with HIV in Bolivia, whether they are Bolivian or foreigners, as there are some foreigners living with HIV.
When I started volunteering at the VIHvir Foundation, I saw so many close friends die because they didn't have the medicines they needed or they couldn't get health care. Some were persecuted by the police. People living with HIV had to face so much discrimination and rejection.
We want a budget to be allocated so that the people who can't pay for their antiretroviral drugs get them and all their health care free.
HIV doesn't discriminate. Some people live with the virus and don't know they have it. Others have HIV as a consequence of being raped or from unsafe blood transfusions. And the vast majority got HIV as a result of combining alcohol drinking and having risky sex. For many people, HIV was the only thing left over after being in a relationship they believed was based on love and mutual faithfulness. Most people never believed that they could get HIV because they did not consider themselves as part of the so-called high-risk groups.
My idea of HIV started to change the moment it got into my family. When I realized that HIV does not care what sex, gender or race you are. By making my HIV status public together with daughter, I think we showed the other face of HIV.
I am a housewife and I am living with HIV for 6 years. About 12 years ago I was diagnosed with uterine cancer. I had the treatment and I recovered of the cancer. 2 months later I was diagnosed with leukemia and had to have a blood transfusion every 3 months. This treatment I followed. As I'm a single mother, I went to work as a cook hospital. I got ill there and they did a transfusion which saved my life. That is how they transmitted me HIV.
I found out when I broke my hip and had to go into the ER. My baby came 2 months early and that's when they told I had HIV.
I'm a mother, a grandmother, a friend, a companion. I'm a woman living with HIV.
Some people are born with a virus and now there are girls, boys, teenagers, and mothers all suffering the consequences of HIV.
Every Monday we meet new people from rural areas. Maybe 15 to 20 people from different places, from Pnauta, Killarkello, Clesa, Sukaaba, to Shipari. They come from everywhere and we're getting really worried, because it seems that the number of people with HIV in rural areas is rising.
Discrimination and stigma is commonplace for those living with HIV, at work, in their health center and even in their own home. They are subjected to abuse as a result of a lack of information and education about how to prevent the disease and what it means to live with HIV.
When I got diagnosed, I saw the headlines in the Los Tiempos newspaper. Police hunt for Argentine man infected with AIDS. A policeman came to this house and I fled because I knew they wanted to deport me. There was so much ignorance, prejudice and discrimination back then. Some people died because it was too late and they developed AIDS. Others died of stress. Others because they were outed. Others because they were thrown out of their homes. Others when the doctors told them how nice. And how did you get it? It must be for something. You must deserve it. People were so judgmental. It happened to me. I remember when I had to go into hospital. They put me in room 12. I could hear them saying in the hallway, "Go and see the AIDS patient in number 12. And everyone would come into my room. Students, cleaners, everyone wanted to look at the monster with AIDS. People with HIV still suffer discrimination, mostly in the hospitals and health centers, and sometimes in other workplaces as well, but I think it is good to be visible. It is good to show ourselves.
After I was raped, I went home to cry. I baked them then. I was in a daze for a long time. I think that, even now, the pain of rape doesn't finish. Maybe getting HIV has made me a better person, but rape, no. It leaves scars in the life of a woman and man, forever.
I think she could have some problems if she did not take her medications. But she believes she can make it. She believes she can live with HIV. And I know she'll live a long time, or long enough to enjoy life.
A lot of people know Violetta, and when they see me with her they think I've got HIV too. To be honest, I don't care. As I said, first I look to see what a person is like. I think HIV is terrible, but it's worse when you meet people who are hateful. As I said, I don't care about the HIV, I care about she's like.
For example, if you are raped, you can take the medicine that I take for 2 days to prevent a possible HIV transmission. But when it happened to me, I didn't know this. Now I recommend anyone who has suffered sexual violence to take it. And if any of you experienced rape, you should get tested for HIV.
People with HIV need to take antiretroviral drugs every day, but these are difficult to access and expensive.
Unfortunately, they don't kill the virus. The only thing they do is inhibit the virus to stop its reproduction and therefore preventing the damage of the immune system. If you stop taking the antiretroviral drugs, the HIV starts to reproduce itself again and kills your defenses. So that's why we have to take our medicine every day, because if we leave it for just 1 day, the virus reproduces again. Not just once, but millions of times. The cost of treating one person with HIV for 1 year is around $10,000. Which is impossible for most people to pay.
Sometimes I have to make tough decisions, like whether to let my kids go hungry because I don't have the money. And then I get ill and I get stressed and worried because I don't know where to get the money. I don't know what to do, I don't know where to go, and I can't do anything, and I get so desperate for not having money.
The antiretroviral drugs we take are donated by the Global Fund under generic, which means that they have the same active ingredients as the brand name antiretroviral drugs, but don't go under the same name. The cost of these generic drugs is around $400 per person per year.
Until date, most of the healthcare and HIV prevention services in Bolivia are funded by international cooperation, even though Law 3729 stipulates that the state should provide free comprehensive healthcare.
What we need are resources to be able to deal with this epidemic and stop wasting money on programs that aren't sustainable. We're interested in health. Prevention is sustainable as we're working on making sure that people don't get HIV. And we also ensure that people living with HIV who receive health care can live many years, but responding to our country.
The investment in minimum compared to the benefits and social gains that we will receive if we guarantee that people living with HIV not only have access to the antiretroviral drugs as stipulated in the law, but also to medications and treatment for opportunistic infections. In a lot of health centers, sometimes due to ignorance, but more probably because of a lack of will, people living with HIV are not treated properly, arguing the law only mentions antiretrovirals. But let's not forget that it also talks about comprehensive multidisciplinary health care for people living with HIV. The law states that people living with HIV have to be protected and their health care will be covered by the government. In many cases, these responsibilities of the state are not being met. There is lack of information, but generally it is lack of will and absence of clear political will.
Sometimes the numbers and statistics say one thing, but actually there are probably more people affected. It's up to them to allocate the funds. There is money for this, but it's not used. Like in the departmental government or the municipal government, these funds are going to waste, and they could be assigned to help people living with HIV.
Funding from the Global Fund runs out in 2015, and we don't know whether our country will be eligible for further funding, as Bolivia has now been classified as a middle-income country after having eradicated extreme poverty.
It is a terrible business. HIV is a big business around the world. They're only interested in profit and they don't care if a child dies of HIV. This happens all the time all over the world, but even more so in middle-income countries, which they see as a potential market for their drugs. If we were in Africa, maybe the antiretroviral drugs would be free. But as the per capita income in Bolivia, Brazil, Mexico and Colombia has risen, they're saying, you can't have it for free, you're going to have to pay us.
If the international donations stop, then grandmothers, babies, children and adults living with HIV and AIDS will die, because they won't get treatment and proper health care they need, and therefore, the virus will spread across the country.
Preventing HIV is rather like preventing a common cold. If you are shut in a room with 5 people with the flu, the best thing you can do is treat them so that you don't have 20 ill persons. That is what they have to do with HIV.
December 1st is World AIDS Day, and here in Bolivia, it's one of the few chances people living with HIV are listened by local authorities and by the media. Red Bull works so that everyone understands that there are thousands of people living with HIV every day.
Red Bull was founded here in Cochabamba on July 8th by some of the leaders we could bring in thanks to support from the Institute for Human Development. We said that together we could face the authorities. Because all too often some of us leaders had to speak for a lot of people, we decided that from the minute that Red Bull was born we would demand that they pay attention to us, not by making an exception first but by treating us like any other citizen. because we wanted more people to be involved in the foundation of Red Bull, but we were only 17 because most of us were dying. Red Bull was literally founded on the dead bodies of its first members.
Thanks to us setting up Red Bull, we got this fabulous gift from the Brazilian government, a donation of antiretroviral drugs for Bolivia, and thanks to the activism of the people working in Red Bull.
HIV is a public health problem, and if the Bolivian government doesn't face up to its responsibilities, then AIDS will come knocking at the door of a lot of Bolivian homes.
A lot of people who have died because they were outed and judged. First they were killed socially.
We need to be aware that no one is immune, and so we should be a little more tolerant, a little more humane, and put ourselves in the shoes of those living with HIV.
Since Red Bull was founded, people like Daniel, Violetta, Fernandita, Julio Cesar, Quippy, William, Nancy, Nelson, Juan Carlos, and so many others have turned their HIV status into a flag under which they fight for their human rights. They are the spokespersons for those who don't have a voice, so that those afraid of being recognized have a chance to live, be seen and heard, and have a future.
The medical and scientific part has a limit, because it is very difficult to access a person's spirit with medicines to the feelings of the person. That is why we have alternative therapies based on spiritual energy that do not have anything to do with religion. As doctors, we can cure the body, but we can't cure the soul, the spirit.
In November 2013, the government promised a significant increase in funding for HIV prevention and comprehensive care in Bolivia. It guaranteed that people living with HIV or AIDS in Bolivia will have access to antiretroviral and a dignified opportune health care.
The national government has taken a political commitment which is also a social mandate to protect the health of all Bolivian men and women, and this includes those living with HIV. That is why in the last 4 years, the budget for HIV has increased over 200%. Nowadays, this is the total resources allocated to the national HIV program.
The thousands of people living with HIV in Bolivia hope that this promise is kept and that they too can live well.
We have to celebrate life. We have to celebrate life. This is what I tell you. Based on the learning of my HIV test, I invite each and every one of you to get excited about life without having to be diagnosed.
Dedicated to all the people who died of HIV in Bolivia while waiting for the government's response. Living well with HIV. Demanding our fair right. A production of the Bolivian network of people living with HIV/AIDS, Red Bull, with funding from VIHvir.